Why is it so easy to pile more and more on your plate, but nearly impossible to take anything off? It's because your brain is wired to add, not subtract. And today we're going to learn how to flip that script. So many brilliant professionals tell me the same thing. I don't know how my plate just keeps getting so full. And it's because adding feels productive and taking something off feels almost wrong. What if that breakthrough that you want isn't about doing more, but in finally allowing yourself to take things off the plate? Today, we're diving into how to make that shift. I'm the Get It Done Diva, and this is the weekly Momentum podcast. This is your place to escape the busyness trap and get into aligned, purposeful action. I help busy professionals just like you turn what they know into what they are known for so they can lead their teams, wow their clients, build raving fans, and bring their brilliance to the world. If you want to make the weekly momentum process your new breakthrough habit, grab the free training Weekly Planning for Busy Professionals at getitdonediva.com or use the link below. The weekly momentum process actually began almost 2 decades ago when I began hosting something called Monthly Momentum. And it was very similar to what we do in Weekly Momentum. I had a core group of women that would attend, and then now and again, we'd have new people that would come and check us out, and some of them would stay, and some of them would realize it wasn't their cup of tea. Now, at the end of every monthly momentum, one of the things that we would do is we would go around the group and everybody would stand up and they would share what their one thing was for the month. The one thing you could think of it as your main goal or your main priority for the upcoming month. I've always enjoyed setting goals, but the idea of the one thing came to me. Shout out to Michelle Colon, who was a member at the time and who gifted me on Valentine's Day one year, the book, The One Thing. And after I read that book, I really saw how powerful it is to have just one main goal so that all of the goals don't just get neutralized and become equally important. That way you can really truly have priorities. Otherwise, you really don't have priorities. And so as a community, we adopted the idea of the one thing, and we would stand up and share it at the end of every monthly momentum. A new lady joined us one particular month, and we were going around, and about half of the group had already stood up and shared their one thing. And it came to her turn. She had shared a lot during the meeting, and we'd had some really great dialogue around her business. She stood up confidently and she said, I have two one things. And at that moment, the entire room just busted up into laughter. And the irony of it was she looked around with a confused look on her face. And I think that illustrates really what we're talking about today. We don't see the irony, the idiocracy, the craziness sometimes of what we're actually doing because we're so seeped into it. There's so many emotional and mental and logical tentacles that are holding on to all of these things that we want to do. So it's very hard sometimes for us to see the actual truth of what we're saying, and sometimes the humor in it. Now, obviously, if you have two one things, you don't have a one thing. And that was the irony of that day. Now, over the years, I've learned more about productivity, both from my own experience and coaching hundreds of professionals around their productivity, their planning, and achieving big goals. And I've brought in other tools and other ideas and other strategies, ideas like the 80-20 rule, which is very similar to the one thing. And then when I wrote my book, Daily Momentum, a couple of years ago, one of the things that I started to realize was that what is equally important is this idea of having what I call a not to do list. Because when we have not to do's, we're supporting ourselves in prioritizing less, whether it's one thing or the 20%. The not to do list I found is an important part of this. And what I learned after I introduced the not to do list is something very interesting. And it's something that was at play that day when that lady stood up and said, I have two one things. And what that is this emotional attachment that we have to things that makes it really difficult for us to let things go. What I have come to realize is that it is way, way harder to take things off our plate than it is to put them on. As I've talked about the not to do list and incorporated it in both the weekly planning process and also the annual planning process in your breakthrough year, there is a one-page roadmap for the year, and there are equal parts, 5 big projects for the year and 5 not to dos for the year. And then on the weekly and the daily planning, I've encouraged my clients to introduce at least 1 or 2 not to dos in the mix so that it's not just about having a to do list, it's about having a not to do list. Now, I would say 90% of my clients struggle incredibly with coming up with not to dos. I have one client who absolutely loves not to dos. She gets it. She loves the idea and gets so much joy and satisfaction each week or each day in writing down what she's not going to do, whether it's that one of her team is going to do that thing instead, or that she's just not going to do it that day, or she's not going to do it at all. It doesn't matter. But she's a minority. Most of us are clinging so hard to all of the things that we have on our plate that the idea of taking something off feels like we're losing part of ourselves. And a big piece of that is because when we say yes to something, when we add something to our plate, it's actually an emotional decision. It's been shown through studies that we actually, for example, when we're going to buy something, we're going to make that decision using our emotions first, and then we back it up with the logical side of our brain. So emotionally, we will think, I want that new pair of shoes. I want that software. I want to book that cruise. We're going to have those instant emotional reactions to something. And then the logic kicks in and we come up with logical reasons to justify why we want to do something. Our emotions motivate our decisions. And that emotional reasoning could be just to fill a need that we're having in that moment. And it might be, for example, because we're feeling really overworked and burnt out. So we say yes to that cruise. We deserve a vacation. We deserve time off. But a few days later, maybe we're not feeling so overwhelmed. Maybe we've had some rest. If the cruise choice popped up again, we might not say an emotional yes to it. It might even turn into a maybe. It won't have such an emotional pull. However, once we've said yes to something, even though our emotional needs may change, our situation might have changed, it's almost like that emotional attachment to whatever it is that we put on our plate is so strong that we feel that we cannot take it off our plate. I've spent a lot of this year simplifying, taking things off my plate, regrouping. And so I'm in the trenches with you all. I understand how hard it is to take things off your plate, to let go of things. One of the things I let go of was the business name that I was using, the Women's Business Momentum Center. I began my business 20 years ago with that name, and I've developed other names and programs and ideas and wrote the Get It Done Diva's Guide to Business and have established myself as the Get It Done Diva. And it almost felt like all of the different names and programs were competing. It was very difficult for me to feel grounded in my business because I felt like it was being pulled in a lot of different directions. And I knew that I needed to simplify things, but it took months of regrouping and fighting to keep everything on my plate, all of the names, the Momentum Squad, the Get It Done Diva, the Women's Business Momentum Center, even working with a coach and fighting to have two different businesses and create two different websites and two different social media accounts to encompass the two different businesses so that I could hold on to them both until I finally got to the point that I realized how much work that was. And I began to look at, why am I fighting so hard to keep the Women's Business Momentum Center? And what I began to untangle was the emotional attachment. I realized that the Women's Business Momentum Center had been a name that I had launched my business with. I was emotionally attached to it. I felt like people knew me for that. I felt like it established me as credible because of the words that are in the name. On the other hand, I also felt that the name gave the impression that I was bigger than I was. And all of these things felt really good. However, living up to being the Women's Business Momentum Center, staying on top of all of those things, didn't feel where my passion was anymore. I wanted to spend more of my energy and my time and my focus on helping my clients with their productivity, focusing on helping them really share their brilliance in different ways and lead their companies. And the idea of working on their business, not just in it, so that they could begin to create more space and stop drowning in the busyness of their business or their career. And I realized that the Women's Business Momentum Center would not allow me to do that. It was almost like going through a divorce. I had to realize that I needed to exit that name, the Women's Business Momentum Center, untangle the emotions that were attached to it, and then really lean into what I wanted rather than what I didn't want in order to allow me to take that off my plate. I will tell you that the moment that I realized, oh, this is why I'm so attached to it, and I realized the emotional attachment to the name, a lot of the resistance to letting it go was released, and it became much, much easier. I've spent most of this year regrouping, rebranding, cleaning things up, getting streamlined under the brand Get It Done Diva. That's not the only thing I've been letting go of, though. I've spent the whole year really looking, holding things up, looking at, why am I keeping this? Why am I holding on to this? And untangling the emotions behind the decision-making process to allow me to decide to take things off my plate. If you want to take things off your plate, you can't rely on it just being a logical decision. What you're going to need to do is untangle the emotions that put it on your plate to start with and look at how you feel about those things now and if it still is filling that need emotionally. For example, a big piece of the Women's Business Momentum Center that I had to come to terms with letting go of was this idea of, am I good enough? If I'm not this entity of being the Women's Business Momentum Center, am I enough? That was one of the scary questions that was keeping me holding on to that name. In order to take some things off your plate, you might need to look really hard in the mirror and have some difficult conversations. You can do that in many different ways. For me, it's really helpful to talk things out. Sometimes I do that on the page when I'm using one of my planners. I especially do that in my daily momentum planner. And also talking it out with someone else. Because sometimes when you have to explain something, you can see insights that you can't see when you're just explaining something to yourself. Every 90 days, like all of my clients, I create a 90-day plan. And on that 90-day plan at the top, there is one thing. And then underneath that, there are three main projects. There are also three not to dos on the 90-day plan as well. The objective of everything that's on the plan is that it should be supporting and moving you towards the one thing that's at the top of the plan. And for me right now, what is at the top of the plan is going all in with my YouTube channel. I absolutely love sharing my knowledge on YouTube. I love the idea that you can find a video that I created 2, 3, 4 years ago and get benefit from it tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now. And so my one thing, this 90-day plan, is to set up a foundation for a really strong YouTube channel. And nothing is as easy as it seems, right? So what I've realized as I've been doing that is there's a domino effect to everything that we do. Can you hear me when I say this? I know you're nodding your head. When we start to do something professionally or in our businesses, typically it is not as cut and dry as it seems. On the surface, it might seem like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start my YouTube channel. I'm going to establish some really great videos. I'm going to set up the banner. I'm going to create the podcast. And it feels like it's in a bubble. But once you start working on something for your business or for your career, typically what happens is you start to realize it's like a spider web. And there's a lot of things that are attached to that. So for example, with my one thing around the YouTube channel, what I realized was that I needed to look back at my business again and really look at who is my audience? Who am I speaking to? What are some of the trainings and tools that I want to share with people on the YouTube channel? And when I started to do that, I realized there was a lot of confusion in what I had to offer, and that things needed organizing and simplifying, and ultimately, I needed to take things off the plate. I needed there to be less, which leads me to something that I say all the time to my clients. Less is more. And I like to flip that a little bit too. More is less. And so what I realized as I began to put together my 90-day plan and at the top wrote my one thing was that in order to accomplish that, I was going to need to simplify some things. So going back to the top three projects on my 90-day plan, the number one project became simplifying everything. And what I started out meaning by that was a lot of the software I was using, moving over to different platforms, eliminating things. If you're a professional, you understand that there are CRMs and there's website software and hosting and domain names that you have and email marketing software and online course programs. All of these things are things that we put on our plate. And it's very easy and emotional, as I've already said, for us to add things to our plate. And then we become so entangled, especially in technology and software, that it can feel really difficult to untangle a piece of it and pull it away because everything talks to everything. We might be using Zapier to connect different softwares, or we might have integrations between softwares that mean it's very difficult to untangle all of that mess. So I've spent the last 90 days starting to really invest the time in taking things off my plate. So what I want to share with you is, first of all, taking things off our plate is hard. Go into it realizing that, because then you're less likely to back away from it when it becomes hard. The second thing is to realize that it's emotional. You put it on your plate with an emotional choice. And so if you're going to take it off your plate, you're going to have to unravel the emotions. And the third thing is to realize that it is going to take time to untangle things and to set aside the time to do it. I've spent a lot of time over the last 90 days looking at all the software. I made a list of all the software I have. In fact, I actually made a list of all of the expenses that I have for my business, all of the overhead, and really began to look at what do I want to keep? What do I want to think about? And what do I want to get rid of? And how then will I get rid of this thing? What are the steps that I need to take to untangle it from everything else? And yes, there's been a lot of work. There's been a lot of copying and pasting and saving things and moving things over so that I didn't lose them as I was getting rid of software. But more than that, I've noticed again and again the emotional attachment to so many of the things I have, even the software. Finally, one of the other things that I've been going back and forth about is my office. I love my office. I found it about 3 years ago, and it was one of those moments where it showed up at the perfect time. It has been a great resource for me. It creates a quiet space, a winning environment where I'm able to meet with clients and also where I can do my podcasts and my recordings. And I love coming here, honestly, at the weekends or in the evenings because there's nobody here. And I'm the only one here, and I get to really feel like I can have this creative space for myself. I don't have to worry about the dog or the dirty dishes or the TV in the other room being on too loud and distracting me. I'm able to really focus when I'm at the office. But I've been traveling a lot. And I haven't been using the office. So I'm having this back and forth as I'm looking at all of my expenses. Do I keep the office or do I let go of it? And then I start to unpack in my mind, if I let go of the office, where do I put all the stuff? How do I set up my podcast space at home? And it feels really complicated. When something feels complicated, the easiest thing we can do is choose to just keep it on the plate rather than having to figure that out. I've been also looking at the emotional attachment that I have to the office. I listed off to you a minute ago all of the logical reasons of why I have an office and how it's beneficial. But I had to get really real and truthful with myself as well, because there's something about having an office that makes me feel more legit. It makes me feel more successful. It makes me feel professional. None of these things are necessarily true. An office doesn't necessarily do that. That's more of the emotion that is driving me to want to keep the office. And so, whether or not you choose to take things off your plate, like for me with my office, looking at that need, that emotional need, and realizing what that need is. For example, proving myself, feeling good enough, and being able to realize you don't need the thing to make you feel the certain way. And so as I'm untangling all of the office stuff, and I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to keep the office yet, what I came to realize was there was a lot of logical reasons why I had the office that made a lot of sense, and I could list those off for myself. But I didn't leave it at that. I began to look at what had put it on my plate and kept it on my plate. What were the emotional reasons why I had the office? It gave me a sense of credibility. It made me feel professional. And when I started to really look at that, I began to see that the office made me feel legit, made me feel like I was good enough. And that was something that I could start to shift in different ways. Now, I don't know if this is landing with you or if I'm making any sense at all, but the point I'm trying to make here is whether or not you decide to take things off your plate or not, it is incredibly powerful to look at why you put them on your plate and why you are keeping them on your plate emotionally so that you can work through that and free yourself from the emotional attachment to things, realizing that, for example, I can look at ways to remind myself that I am good enough, remind myself that I am legit. And you'll see a pattern here. I'm being completely vulnerable with you. I've shared a few different scenarios here in this episode, the name of my business, my office, that I've been holding on to because it didn't feel good enough. because it didn't feel legit, because I felt like it made me feel more professional, right? These are all things that I need to learn to satiate myself rather than using things to make me feel good enough. Now, I've just unpacked quite a few different ideas, so let me take a moment to recap. Ultimately, what we're looking at here is that number one, if you're listening to this podcast, if you're still listening, then you probably have too much on your plate and you really would like to have less on your plate. And what I'm sharing with you around that today is that it is a lot easier to put things on your plate than take them off. It's not you, it's the same for everyone. The reason behind that is because of very emotional reasons that we put things on the plate. And so we have to handle the emotions when we're taking things off the plate. We've also looked at the idea that it takes time. We've got to untangle things, and we have to set aside time to do that if we want to create more space. I know it feels counterintuitive, but if you feel really busy and overwhelmed and burnt out, you are going to need to set aside time to change that, to untangle things, to take things off your plate. And ultimately, what I want you to truly get is something that is almost like a mic drop moment when I share it with my clients. And that is when you say yes to something, it's easy, it's emotional. But what's happening behind the scenes is you're saying no to several other things because you only have so much bandwidth. And so when you create that to-do list at the beginning of the week with all of those things that you're saying yes, 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 yes to, by the end of the week, I'm going to guarantee that there's at least some items on that list that you have not completed. Those are things that whether you chose it deliberately or not, you said no to. The reason you said no to the things that you did not accomplish on the list is because you said yes to the things you did accomplish and probably a whole bunch of other stuff that you said yes to that wasn't even on the list. It's so easy to say yes. It takes time to sit and think about what you're saying no to when you say yes to something. And the reason I am bringing this up is because the thing I keep saying, it is a lot easier to put things on your plate than to take them off. So if you can begin to train yourself to not put things on your plate, then you'll have less things to take off. When you start to realize that when you say yes to something easily, you're also saying no to several other things and going in more intentionally to the buffet so that when you're putting the food on the plate, that you're actually seeing that there's only so much space and you will ultimately be saying no to something else. Now, I do also want to bring into play that we're not just talking about work here. I used the example of the buffet and the plate just now. That is a perfect way to look at this. There's this miracle drug right now, the GLP, for example, that is helping people lose weight. But it's the exact same concept that I'm talking about here. Less is more. It's not that the drug is changing people's body and miraculously disintegrating the fat. What's happening is when you use the drug, you take in less, you eat less. Less is more. This idea of less is more is the cornerstone of absolutely everything. Everything from weight loss to mastery in your profession to writing that best-selling book or creating and launching that big idea. All of it is about less is more. When I write a book with a client, there's always so many ideas, but the best books have simple, clear ideas. They don't put everything in the kitchen sink in it because it's overwhelming. Less is more and more is less. Let's take a moment to incorporate how we can use the weekly momentum process to help you take things off your plate and maybe even resist putting some things on it in the first place. So, step one of the weekly momentum process is to rewind. So, as you look at last week, you can start to look at what were you saying yes to? What did you add to your plate? And more importantly, because we learn from our own experiences, why? Start with the logic and then start to ask yourself, what was the emotional reasoning behind saying yes and adding things to your plate, the things that you added last week? And adding things to your plate comes in many different shapes and sizes. So don't just think about your career or your business. I want you to think about friendships and family and relationships. We have many different areas in our lives. And so you want to start to look at where you're adding things to your plate in all of those areas, not just your professional area. Because if we're just focused on ourselves as professionals, we're going to be hijacked by the rest of our life. So when we do weekly momentum and when we rewind, especially, and when we plan, we want to make sure we're taking into consideration all areas of our life. So when you're rewinding, really looking at what did I say yes to? What have I added to my plate? And why? Why did I do that? You can learn from your own experience then. Next, when you are realigning, step two is where you're looking at your bigger goals, your 90-day goal, your annual goal. There have been studies done that have shown that we also make decisions based on how we're feeling right now and the consequences right now, rather than on our future self, right? A lot of times people make, for example, financial decisions based on how they feel and where they are right now, rather than taking into consideration their future self 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And so we're driven more by the immediate gratification rather than the delayed gratification of our choices. And so this realign step is going to help you shift that balance, because ultimately we do want to take into consideration our future self in the decisions that we're making in this moment right now. If you are looking forward and reminding yourself what's important to you by looking at your 90-day plan, looking at your annual goals, maybe even your roadmap, your 3 to 5 year goals, your 10-year goals. If you take a moment to do that every week, then you're realigning with your future self, and that's going to help you make better choices with what to put on your plate and what to say yes and what to say no to. Just taking a few minutes every week to realign and remind yourself what your bigger goals are and adjust them if you need to, so that you keep that in mind as you then move through the week. Then in step three, when you're planning, this is where we're going to bring in that not to do list. When you're making your plan for the week, I always encourage you to play the game of the weekly top 10. That's 10 to dos or projects or ideas that you are focusing on for the week, and having that list so that you can focus on it throughout the week. What I would encourage you to do this week is to really look at having at least 3 not to dos on that list. So that still gives you 7 things to do, but what are you going to not to do? And keep in mind that a not to do doesn't mean not to do ever. It just means not to do this week. It might mean you're not going to do it, that you're going to delegate it to someone else. There's a lot of different ways you can not to do. What I want you to do this week is I want you to become a raving fan, like my client, of not to do's and incorporate them into your weekly top 10. So you have at least 3 of them this week. It's going to help you not put so much on the plate so that then you don't have to deal with having to take it off again afterwards. It's the same idea as eating that chocolate cake. It's easy to eat the chocolate cake, but it's hard to release the pounds and the fat that have been put on by eating the chocolate cake, right? So if you can get better at having not to do's, that's going to help you streamline things and have less on your plate to start with. I also want you to be thinking about, is there something that you could start to think about taking off your plate? It's going to need time. We'll cover that in a minute. But what's one thing that you want to deliberate, like me with my office? You don't have to decide that you are absolutely going to take it off your plate this week. But is there something that you could contemplate potentially taking off your plate, and maybe have that as one of your weekly top 10 as well? Now, as we move into the final step, step 4, where you're planning, I want you to, of course, plug in everything that's on your weekly top 10 into your week. So you're setting aside time to do the things you want to do, setting yourself up for success and making it a winnable game for yourself. But I particularly want you to look at that thing that you're contemplating taking off your plate. Can you set aside a chunk of time just to look at untangling that? To ask yourself, why did I put this on my plate to start with? What is the logical reasons? What are the emotional reasons? And what would it take to untangle this? You don't even have to do anything beyond that this week around it. But if you set aside the time to just start the dialogue with yourself around that, then you're going to begin to create some momentum around taking things off your plate and releasing the emotional hold they have on you. When you do this, you're going to feel so much more confident and clear, and you're going to create so much momentum as you step into this week. I hope I've given you plenty to think about as we've moved through weekly momentum this week. This whole idea of having too much on our plate has become something that we just say, but do we really know what we mean when we say it? Really looking at, instead of just blurting out, I have too much on my plate, to really look at what's on the plate. How did it get there? What do you want to take off the plate? If it was a plate of food, you'd figure it out. You'd make choices. You'd start to get rid of the things that you didn't want anymore, you don't enjoy anymore, and you'd make room for the things that you do want more of. That's what we're starting a conversation around today. What I hope you're starting to realize is that your brilliance, it just can't shine when you're buried in busyness. You're not stuck, you're just overloaded. And that is exactly what's keeping your next breakthrough on hold. You know, when the world feels chaotic, overwhelming, and relentless, it's so easy to fall into survival mode, to keep putting out fires, to stay busy instead of moving forward, and to lose sight of your own brilliance. But it is exactly in these moments, yes, especially in the chaos, that you need clarity, structure, and direction the most. This is when your next breakthrough begins. Not when life slows down, not when work magically becomes lighter, not when someone gives you more hours in a day. It starts when you create the space for your brilliance to shine and you stop letting busyness just run the show. What if I could give you a framework to create the space, structure, and the boundaries to make the next year a breakthrough year? You see, most people don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they lack space. Space to think, space to regroup, space to choose the right next step instead of just reacting to all the noise. You want a breakthrough year that gives you the space to shine your brilliance, not get bogged down in busyness. And you can absolutely have it. I've created a program called the Breakthrough Year. It's a complete planning and boundary setting framework that walks you through designing your year, mapping your milestones, organizing your priorities, and creating the environment you need to stay in momentum. A framework that protects your time, your energy, and your brilliance without burning out. And I'm also throwing in some bonus programs, so I'm really setting you up for success. I've coached people through burnout, overwhelm, big transitions, stalled momentum, and even I don't know where to begin. And I've watched them rise, one simple shift, one boundary, one powerful decision at a time. I believe clarity creates freedom, structure creates energy, and choosing change creates breakthroughs. So if you're ready to step into your brilliance and make this a breakthrough year, let's jump into this together. Once you commit to the shift, the momentum follows. If you're interested in your breakthrough year program, you'll find the link below, or you can visit the website getitdonediva.com and find out more there. I hope today's episode helped you start to look at how you're putting things on your plate, what you can say no to, and how you can begin to remove things on your plate and detach from the emotional needs that are driving our decision-making process. I also hope you realize that you can make small shifts and create big breakthroughs. I'll see you in the next episode of Weekly Momentum.